Let's talk a little bit about knife fighting. Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatore. So one specific aspect of knife fighting that I want to look at is the fact that how you use a knife against another person who's trying to use a knife on you, so to speak, is very much dictated by the size of the blade in many, many ways. But one specific aspect that I want to focus on is essentially blocking or parrying. Now, when someone either thrusts or cuts at you with a knife, they're presenting an opportunity for you to block or evade, or there are various different ways you can defend yourself from that attack. Yes, in the purest sense, if they lunge at you or stab at you, however they do it, whether it's ice pick grip or normal saber grip, whichever they do, you could dodge, you could block with your spare hand. This is assuming you've got a knife as well. You can block with the knife itself in various different ways. You can double up, you can use it like a small stick or a bar. But there's one specific type of defense which is highly applicable to the Bowie knife, and that is essentially to do what's like a guard in saber fencing. And this, as far as we can tell, is what was taught with Bowie knife technique in the 19th century. But instead of blocking the person's incoming blade, whether it's a thrust or a cut, usually it'll be a thrust, rather than blocking the blade, you block the person's hand or arm because you can reach it. So if they come and stab in at you, instead of putting a parry in against the blade of their weapon, you essentially put a percussive parry in against their incoming hand or arm. Now, this is something which is, I think, particular to big knives, and this is where you might say, well, okay, Matt, what do you mean by big? Well, that's what I'm talking about in this video, and it really, this is just to reiterate, this is a massive virtue of Bowie knives in particular, larger Bowie knives, but of all larger knives, that you've got the ability to chop into incoming attacks at the person's arm and hands. And of course, this has the double benefit of not only blocking the incoming attack, but also potentially disabling and enabling the end of the fight. So for example, if a stab comes in at me, I might go chop into the arm, take over with the hand, bam, stab, or chop, dot, dum. So chop, block, stab, or chop, block, cut, whatever you want to do. And this is the kind of thing indeed that we see in Filipino martial arts, but it seems to be basically very, very similar in all large knife systems from all over the world. And you might notice there's some similarities, incidentally, with sword and buckler stuff. So we start to see things in sword and buckler, and indeed rapier and dagger, where we might defend with the things together, then take over with the buckler and offend back with the sword, or with rapier and dagger, cross with both, and then keep the dagger in the bind and come in with the sword to finish off the opponent. So this kind of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 motion. And this is something you can do with a large blade because you've got a large margin of error, should we call it. Okay, so if there's an incoming arm, an incoming attack, it's possible for you to cut into it because you've got that large blade there. It's not possible to do it, really, realistically, if you've got something like a Swiss Army knife. Why? Well, quite simply, the blade's too small. So if we've got a stab coming in here, yes, theoretically, I could attempt to try and block or cut into the incoming attack with this tiny blade. However, it probably wouldn't work very reliably, and it probably wouldn't be the thing that you'd recommend the most. Probably you'd be using the offhand more and using your little weapon as a thing of attack and evading more, okay? If we move up slightly in size to something like this, this is a 4-inch blade. It's kind of borderline, I think. Again, I think while you could do it, while you could block with the edge of a 4-inch blade against an incoming attack, I think it's kind of like a tall order. I think trying to make that work with such a small blade is really quite a big ask. And again, it's about kind of like the margins of error. Yes, you could do it. I'm not saying you couldn't do it. And indeed, if you've got an incoming attack, you can oppose with the thrust. So you could do a direct attack into the attack. A bit like Bruce Lee's kind of intercepting fist thing, but essentially doing it as the attack comes in, stabbing into the incoming hand and arm, and that would be perfectly effective. But again, because it's a smaller blade, you've got a smaller margin for error, in my opinion. Let's move up slightly in size to a 7-inch blade. I think a 7-inch blade could do this absolutely reliably because now you've got a large margin of error. So against any kind of attack that's coming in, you can oppose the incoming attack, essentially. And also I should point out at this point, it doesn't matter really whether you hit the person's weapon, their hand or their arm. The important thing is you're blocking the attack. But in blocking the attack, you're doing something which is potentially going to injure them at the same time as blocking the attack. But blocking the attack's the most important thing, because the most important thing is to not get stabbed in your body or your head or your throat. Okay? So not getting stabbed is really important. If you can prevent yourself from getting stabbed, then do it. And a 7-inch blade, I think, is enough. Is a 6-inch blade enough? I think 6 inches is pretty much on the borderline. Now, I fully understand there are some people out there who do teach opposing incoming attacks with a blade, both point up and point down, and blocking with really quite small blades like karambits and stuff like that. And that's fine. I know those systems exist, particularly in Filipino martial arts. But for the most part, I think anybody, even people practicing Filipino martial arts and looking at stuff like the small karambit, would agree that generally speaking, opposing an incoming attack with a blade of that size, this is 10.5 inches, is easier than opposing it with a blade of 4 inches. You've just got much more to play with. And the fact is that any kind of attack that comes in at you, when you've got a blade of this size, you can easily swipe at the incoming attack. And if it doesn't quite go where you expected, you still stand a pretty large chance of hitting the person's hand or arm. When you've got the smaller blade, you have a lot less chance. And actually that's where I would argue that some of the times in those scenarios, actually opposing with intersecting thrusts at the incoming attack might be a better bet if you've got a smaller blade. So really, to conclude, I think that first of all, one of the big benefits of a large blade over a small blade is the ability to defend more surely. If we look at stuff like the use of the Fairbairn-Sykes dagger, for example, highly effective dagger. It's got a very interesting systems connected to it, or system connected to it, or there's variations if you look at Applegate stuff as well. But for the most part, it is a weapon of offense, not really of defense. And I would argue that these larger knives, like the big Bowie knives, are equally weapons of offense and defense. You can defend very surely with a Bowie knife. And also remember, if someone's doing something like swinging a stick or potentially a sword at you, you're much better off with something of this size than you are with something of that size. And whilst offensively, 4 inches of this in someone's body is pretty much exactly the same as 4 inches of this in someone's body, in defensive terms, I believe that the Bowie knife is vastly superior to this. Of course, we should caveat this whole thing with saying that a Bowie knife is a large object, and very clearly the larger your weapon, the more difficult it is to carry around. And yeah, I guess I'm not saying anything new by saying a larger weapon is advantageous in defense. Yes, that's true. We could apply it to swords, we could apply it to spears, whatever. Okay, and that's absolutely true. You pay a price by carrying the larger weapon because it's more obvious, it's less concealable, it's bigger, it's heavier. You might not legally be able to wear it. In fact, we certainly couldn't in the UK. So there are all of those reasons why the small knife has its place. It's more covert and it can be concealed and all of this kind of stuff. But in defensive terms, I consider the large blade has many more virtues to it than the small blade, and it's largely, as I've said, it's largely to do with the length of the blade and your ability to make a larger margin for error of opposing those incoming attacks and attacking into an attack in such a way that it's not only going to block the attack but also wound the opponent, which yes, you can do with a smaller knife, but it's much harder. I hope that's moderately interesting. I fully accept that knife fighting of all types, knife defense, knife fighting, a subject that are very emotive and I get lots of comments. I also completely accept that different systems will have different views on the most advantageous knives and the ways to use them, and I'm completely okay with that. And I'd also welcome your comments underneath this video, because I'm really interested in this stuff, and I haven't studied Filipino martial arts, but I have lots of friends who have. So if you've studied you know, Kali or Silat or anything like this, I'd be very interested to hear your comments underneath, and also your views. Do you agree that a large knife is basically better for defense than a small knife if you have that choice, or is there some reason why you think a small knife is better in defense than a large knife? Again, I'm completely open-minded, and I'd be very interested to hear your views on this. If you like the channel, if you like the content, subscribe if you haven't already, please, and give me a like if you think that I'm not talking complete rubbish, and if I am talking complete rubbish, then feel free to say so in a polite way. Cheers, folks. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, follow us on Facebook. You can buy t-shirts through Spreadshirt, support us on Patreon, or follow us on Pinterest. Thank you.